svima, i malima i velikima, i bogatima i siromašnima, i slobodnjacima i robovima, dade žig na njihovu desnu ruku ili na čela njihova, te da nitko ne može ništa kupiti ili prodati, osim onoga ko ima žig ili ime zvijeri ili broj imena njezina.
Hello, James. Welcome to Slobodni podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Well, great. Today topics is very important for us. Well, Croatia is now just entered Eurozone. It was 2 months ago. And we are now experiencing something completely new currency, but also very soon, at the end of this year, we will expect something what is completely new for whole world. And that's why this is the main topic today. And we will talk about central bank digital currency. Digital euro will be also in Europe at the end of this year. Can you tell us something? What is exactly central bank digital currency?
Central bank digital currency, CBDC, is exactly as it is advertised. It is a digital currency that is issued by a central bank. And why this is important is because right now, all the things that we think of as money and the things that we generally use, which increasingly these days are cards or more to the point, apps or things like this, those are parts of the commercial banking system through which the commercial banks are able to issue credits essentially to your account that are not direct expressions of central bank liability. Now, a CBDC would be that digital type of money that would be directly connected to the central bank. Usually, right now, in the normal system, the normal banking system as we know it, you have an account at your commercial bank and you bank with them. And the commercial bank has an account at the central bank and they bank with the central bank. Well, in the CBDC system, you might have a wallet that would directly connect you to the central bank itself. And this is important because as Augustin Carstens, who is the executive director of the Bank for International Settlements, which is called the Central Bank of Central Banks, and it's located in Basel, Switzerland, as he said just a couple of years ago, right now, the central bank has absolutely no way of knowing what you're going to do with its expressions of liability. If you have a $100 bill or a 100 peso bill or a 100 euro bill, you can do anything with that. And the central bank has no way to know. It's out there somewhere and it's going somewhere between people and the central bank doesn't know. But with a CBDC system, it would be possible for the central bank to design it in such a way that they can monitor and track every single transaction in the economy, at least every single transaction that's taking place in that CBDC form. So when you go to the store to buy something, the central bank will be informed of that. They will know about that transaction in real time. And that leads to the possibility that CBDCs could be programmable money. That is, they could program certain rules into the use of this expression of central bank liability. So, for example, if there's a carbon tax or a carbon limit, we can't put out so much carbon dioxide, and eating meat causes a lot of carbon production. So we're going to limit the amount of meat that you can eat. And so when you go to the store and you try to buy a steak, oh, sorry, you've got your meat limit for the month. It's possible to design a CBDC system so that they can literally program what you can and cannot buy, where you can buy it, who you can buy it from, how much money you can spend at any given time. And that really is the nightmare of total financial control that we are staring at right now.
In this case, what will happen with commercial banks? What will be their role in this?
Yeah. Very good question. Very important question, because as people may or may not know, with the banking system as it exists right now, the commercial banks are the middlemen between the central banks and the rest of the economy, essentially. And that gives them an incredibly important role of having the ability to literally create money out of expressions of debt. So when you go and get a mortgage or you get a car loan or something like that, the bank is actually literally creating that money into existence and putting it in your account, backed by nothing more than your promise to pay them back with interest, of course. So that's the way the system works right now. In a CBDC system, if if they set it up so that you have a bank directly with a wallet directly with the central bank, that you are directly banking with the central bank, that cuts out that commercial bank middleman. So there, I think, is a battle going on right now, not about whether we should have CBDCs or not. I think all of the arms of the establishment very much look forward to this system. But how do you set it up? And do you set it up so that, oh, okay, well, you won't have a wallet directly with the central bank. Maybe your wallet will be with a commercial bank so that they get kept in that loop and they can maintain that buffer between you and the central bank. It could be any of the options above, and I think it will play out probably differently in different countries and different regions. The Eurozone may choose to take a different form for its CBDC than in America or in Japan or in Germany or sorry, not Germany, but in Canada or many other countries. And there are many different ways to set this up. So it is possible to imagine that you would have, for example, you could have a wallet with the central bank and you're getting your CBDCs through that, but you still have cash and you still have the bank credits in your commercial bank account, and all of these things are swirling around in the economy. It doesn't mean that overnight they're going to flip a switch and the only thing that exists is CBDC. That would only happen in the event of some cataclysmic meltdown of the entire global economy, and maybe they could get away with something like that. But it's more likely that this will be a sort of gradual transition, and CBDCs will just be added to what you already have, and it may or may not be directly with the central bank, or it may be with a commercial bank, or even just some other type of financial institution that's been approved by the central bank.
Well, for example, it could happen. For example, now there is a big, I think, bankruptcy in the United States, Silicon Bank. And it could happen, for example, that you have account in this bank, and now bank went bankruptcy, and now they should show you, if you want to save your deposit, just transfer everything in a digital currency, and you will accept it. It's logic.
That is absolutely a possibility. Absolutely, these types of things happen. The bank shuts down because of some kind of crisis, and then the next week it opens and says, hey, look, you can get 50% of your deposits back, but oh, by the way, now it's in this new form of central bank digital currency. That is certainly an option at the table, and that's something that I think becomes more and more of a concern, considering how precarious the global economic situation is right now, and how much that's been exacerbated by the shutdowns and the lockdowns and all the craziness of the past few years.
Yeah, and it's possible also that you decide in one moment to transfer your deposit from the commercial bank to your digital wallet. That means that it's dangerous, for example, for bank run.
Right, exactly. So bank runs, of course, are, for people who don't know, is when the bank seems to be going under. You're not sure whether they'll be able to give you your deposits back. So you go and take all the money out. And if enough people end up doing that, then obviously the bank won't have enough, because banks don't, as I say, they don't keep all deposits in some safe somewhere ready to be taken out. They're playing with that money and speculating and lending and doing all sorts of things with that money. So if enough people come and they don't have the money for it, then the bank goes under, and that leads to that bank bailout or bank bail-in scenario that we were talking about before. In a CBDC system, it can be structured in different ways, but it is possible essentially to eliminate the concept of bank runs, because there's nothing to take out of your account. Your account is a digital currency. It exists in digital form. There's nothing that you can do in order to take that money out and stuff it under your mattress or whatever, emergency scenario that people might do in a bank run. That doesn't exist, which also leads to all sorts of crazy, wild things that they can do with central bank digital currencies that they can't do with other forms of money. For example, programming in negative interest rates or other things that shouldn't be possible, or even if they were possible, which of course we have seen in recent years, various central banks trying to institute negative interest rates. But as I say, it's always been possible to take your money out of the banking institutions in the form of cash and keep it in your closet. But in a central bank digital currency, if it goes to a negative interest rate, what can you do? There's nothing you can do other than spend your money. So This is the kind of control that we're talking about on a level that's just never been possible before in the history of banking. And I think people perhaps don't appreciate just how important this really is. In fact, my greatest worry isn't, I mean, obviously it is a worry that they could do, as we've been talking about, some sort of spectacular banking crisis and then just basically saying, okay, now you need to accept the central bank digital currency. That could happen. But I actually am more fearful of the idea that people will willingly sort of stumble into this cashless nightmare because they don't understand the importance of what's happening right now. And it is so much easier to just wave your phone at something and beep and, oh, okay, I've paid for that thing, than getting all this cash out and counting out change. And of course, we've started to see this happen in country after country. More and more and more payments are being done electronically already, which is in fact part of the reason that the banksters cite for wanting to institute a central bank digital currency. There's already so much digital forms of payment going on that the commercial banks feel that they're potentially going to lose out as other forms of institutions that aren't banks, like PayPal and whatever, can operate in the banking system and again take some of that commercial banking profit essentially out of their pockets. But also the central banks are looking at this and saying, well, a lot of this is going on digitally anyway, and hey, look over at China and places like that where they're developing their digital currency. We need one so that we won't be left behind in this global marketplace. And the worst part, as I say, I think the worst part is that most people will go along with it because it is convenient and it just seems easier than dealing with physical cash. And they don't understand where that this could turn extremely badly very quickly, and B, the importance of financial sovereignty and what that means, and the ability to transact with people without going through some sort of central bank middleman, and why that might be a bad idea. Again, I think people's ignorance on this issue is one of the most concerning things.
I was listening to one of chief of Federal Reserve, one of the 12 Federal Reserves in the United States. He said exactly, it's not necessary to have CBDC. Whatever today's system can provide you, CBDC will provide you. You don't need, except you want to have control like in China. That means there is no necessity to have CBDC. Why they are pushing?
It is about control, essentially, at the end of the day. This is what it's really about. As I say, they will say things about how, oh, well, more payments are taking place electronically now, and that's changing the nature of money itself. And they'll talk about the Chinese and Russians and other enemy governments that are doing this already. So we have to catch up or we may lose out. And for example, in the United States, obviously the US dollar has been the international world reserve currency for a long time, but they risk losing that status if there's a brand new type of money, a central bank digital currency that really takes off, say the Chinese yuan takes off and becomes an international standard, that the dollar might lose out. So they'll talk about that. But at the end of the day, this is about control. And I don't think it takes a lot of imagination to understand why people in positions of power would want to be able to control the economic activity of their citizens. But let's just say it is the most pervasive, powerful form of control that you could have over a population, to be able to literally turn off people's ability to buy or sell in the marketplace. If they turn off your wallet and you can't use the CBDCs, and there is no cash and there is no other type of trade going on, then you will just starve to death, essentially. And if people need to understand the danger that we are walking into right now, I would say, look to Canada. Look what happened in Canada last year with the Freedom Convoy, the truckers who were protesting against the vaccine mandates, who were rolling across Canada into Ottawa to protest, peacefully protest. No one hurt, no one injured, no one assaulted as a result of this. But the Canadian government declared the Emergencies Act, calling it a national security crisis, to clear these truckers out of Ottawa. And what did they do? They started debanking some of the people involved with these protests, basically trying to shut down their bank accounts, freeze all of their accounts and all of their funds, to the point where there were people who literally couldn't make mortgage payments or really transact at all because their accounts had been frozen. And that required the implementation of the Emergencies Act and the creation of new powers for the Canadian government to be able to do this, and coordination with the banks. It was a big deal, and it took a lot of coordination to do. But in a CBDC economy, it would be a lot easier for the central bank, acting on behalf of the government, to shut people off at a moment's notice. It would not take any time at all. It would not take any coordination. It would simply be a matter of programming it in at the algorithmic level. This person's account has been limited. And that kind of control, the ability to stop people from using their own money, what more control could a government ask for? There is no possibility of dissent. Whenever there is a protest that presents a real threat to the status quo, or actually could change things, they would be able to turn it off at the economic level. And I think that's really the danger we need to keep first and foremost. This is not about some technological innovation or some way to make it easier for you to buy a stick of gum at the local store. This is about controlling your life right down to the economic level.
Yeah, we see now lots of discussion about climate changes and about energy consumption. And as I see, fintech is system what will be for using this CBDC. We saw that in this discussion there is a lots of discussion about carbon footprint. We already had cards, but they are measuring how much carbon you spend. That means in the future, if I understood you well, that you can be limited according to the carbon footprint you produce. Limited to spend your money.
Absolutely right. And I think people have to understand that carbon rationing is coming. We are being prepared for this in a number of ways, and it can start very subtly. For example, restaurants might start putting on their menu the carbon footprint of your meal. So there's a less carbon footprint if you eat this salad than if you eat this steak or something along those lines. And it will be the trendy thing to do to cut down on your carbon footprint. But at some point, it will start to be enforced in various ways. And the easiest way to do that is by setting up some sort of carbon rationing system that's tied into the central bank digital currency that will actually prevent you from spending on things that exceed your carbon quota. And it's going to be sold to the public in the name of climate change because we have to save the earth from our horrible, horrible human activity. And so in order to do that, we're going to get a carbon budget, and you're allowed to have this much carbon ration, and you will be paid in this form of digital currency. Perhaps now they're talking about universal basic income and other ideas. The government will just give you money every month, and then you will be able to spend that much money on the things that they allow you to spend on within your carbon budget. It looks and feels and smells and tastes exactly like technocracy and what they were talking about 100 years ago, but here it is now in this particular form, and they are putting it under this guise of protecting the world from, I guess, the angry weather gods. And unfortunately, again, because people largely go along with the propaganda, they don't understand what they are walking into or how dangerous this really is.
And tool will be programmable money, as I understand. Programmable money, that means they will program exactly how you can spend it. Yes. Well, that is, again, there's many different ways that this can be set up, but programmable money is definitely part of the agenda. And I know politicians in the UK have openly talked about this, not in a secretive way or this is a nightmare way. No, talked about it as a great thing, that they will be able to control what you are spending money on. And it can be done in absolutely any way imaginable. For example, if the government feels that, people are hoarding too much money, they're not spending enough in the economy, they could institute essentially a type of system whereby your money will lose value
the longer you hold it in your account. So they could say, okay, within 1 year, all of the funds in your account will go to zero. So you have to spend all of the funds that are currently in your account within 1 year in order for them to be valuable. I mean, again, think of any sort of restriction and they can simply program that in at the algorithmic level. Here's another example. During the lockdown craziness in Australia a couple of years ago, one of the restrictions that they were enforcing at some point was that you couldn't travel more than 5 kilometers away from your home without a valid pass from the government or whatever crazy rules that they were talking about. That's a cumbersome system to enforce, and having police officers stopping you at every corner and asking to see, your papers and checking where you live and all of that. But again, programmable money could be programmed so that your CBDC wallet won't work if your smartphone detects you are more than 5 kilometers away from your home, or whatever arbitrary rule that they cook into the system. Carbon rationing, carbon credits can be programmed directly into the money itself, so that your CBDC wallet knows your carbon footprint allowance, and it knows what you've bought this month, and it knows the carbon footprint of what you've bought this month, and it can do the calculation. And when you get to the point where you've reached your limit, it can shut off your funds. So again, anything that you can think of, they could program into the money at any time, and it doesn't require essentially anything. All it requires is some coders on the back end to put that into the code, and it could be done immediately.
Yeah, in Europe we saw some examples of so-called 15 or 20-minute cities where they are trying to organize living in an area of 50 minutes walking from your home. In this case, if you want to go somewhere else to buy something and it will be more than 15 minutes walk from your home, maybe you will not be allowed to buy anything. That's some kind of control also.
Absolutely it is. And the worst part, again, for me, the worst part of all of this is how much people are willing to do this voluntarily, go along with it, because they think it is a good idea. And there is a sense to that. Certainly, if you look at some of the cities, certainly in my home of Canada, in the United States, some of these cities are so ridiculously spread out, such mishmashes of sprawl that you have to drive an hour to get to the place that you're going. It is crazy that that system exists, and there's probably a better way to imagine living. But there is a huge difference between people deciding, I'd prefer to live in a small town, in a community where I know people and I can reach everything easily and I don't need to drive for an hour each way just to get to work and all of this. And then there are things like the 15-minute city idea that start out as just city council rules or some sort of test program. But we all know where this is going. Eventually, of course, this is going to be mandatory, and there are going to be zones of travel. You're allowed to travel in this zone at this time of day, but you're not allowed to travel to that zone unless you have this special pass from the government, etc., etc. And all of this will not work, really. It would be completely unimaginable and unenforceable without digital identification, digital money, digital passports of various sorts that will be tracking you via your phone and will be able to understand where you live, where you're going, whether you're allowed to travel, where you're traveling. Of course, this system wouldn't work if it was just police officers that had to stop you at every corner and check where you were going. It only works if there's total digital surveillance of everything, and digital money is absolutely a part of that equation.
Yes. Well, in 2021, it was craziness concerning pandemic. And Croatia has already digital ID from June 2021. From that moment, we had also COVID passports. 5 months later, we couldn't go to the work without COVID passport. And also Croatia is one of the 3 countries, together with the Netherlands and Canada, who has already digital passports. It's just testing period. Why I'm saying this? Because our Prime Minister said that Croatia will become the first digitalized country in European Union. And now we have to talk this for Croatian viewers. if he promised this, and we know that he really follows this agenda from European Commission, and we receive 9.5 billion euros for doing this, for digitalizing Croatia. That means that Croatia can become totally digitalized country and use all these tools what we just mentioned. What people in Croatia should know about this more in this moment?
I think it's important for people to understand that digital ID is absolutely central to this entire agenda. Everything that we're talking about, including digital currency, which will be tied into your digital identity, is absolutely essential in order for this to function. So, as I say, if a government wants to control where you can travel, when, how, what you can spend your money on, all of these things, there needs to be a way for the government to identify you in particular and to be able to reach in electronically and prohibit this or that behavior. And the way to do that is the digital ID. And I think you're exactly right to say that the COVID passports are essentially the Trojan horse for the digital ID. What we saw over the past few years is, well, it's a number of things, but the rollout of this digital identification. And it was very obvious, for example, when we saw in China, where people were being locked in their apartment buildings or within their neighborhood, and they would have to show their QR pass and their green pass in order to be able to be let out of their neighborhood. And people around the world looked at that and said, oh, those evil Chinese communists, of course they'd do that. But then it started happening everywhere around the world, and in Croatia too, and in other places. And what we saw was essentially the propaganda campaign, the rollout for the digital ID via the sort of the passports to move through government blockades. This I can't stress enough how everything is going to be tied to your digital ID, which will include, of course, vaccine passports, whatever sort of booster mandates, whatever the government decides will be necessary for your health in the future. It will include your central bank digital currency wallet, and it will include records of transactions you've had, places you've been, people that you've met. It will all be in this government-issued digital ID. And the worst part is that for generations, people have understood that the government having these types of databases, collecting information, even issuing an ID number for you as a citizen, people have always known that that is tyranny. That is what tyranny is, and that's what it looks like, and that's how it functions. There is no reason for the government to know everything about your life and to track you and to give you a number through which you interact with them so that they can track everything that you're doing. There's no reason for that. And people in the past have protested against that. It always strikes me. I remember I was a young man, just moved to Japan, and I was watching the Gandhi biopic from 1981 or whatever it was, the Richard Attenborough biopic of Gandhi. And it was about the time when Gandhi was in South Africa, and the British colonial government there instituted the rule that all Indians were going to have to carry around a type of identity paper with them at all times. And Gandhi was part of that movement resisting this. Absolutely no. And they started burning their identity papers and got beaten and arrested for it and all of that, because people knew that no, the government providing ID like this is the way that they enslave and tyrannize you. People back in the United States in the 1940s, 30s, 40s, 50s, back when the Social Security system was first being set up, and there were Social Security numbers that were being given to people on cards, people were freaked out about that. No, why is the government trying to assign us this type of identification and these numbers? And it actually says on those original Social Security papers that they gave to people, it actually says not to be used for identification. Because again, people were very, very concerned about IDs and identification and governments having access to the databases of information about you. But now here we are in 2023, And that digital ID is literally being introduced, and a lot of people are taking it without even thinking about it and without understanding this is what tyranny looks like. This is the type of thing that George Orwell was writing about in 1984. This is Big Brother, and this is how it happens. So I just want people to understand that the digital ID is the big red line here. And once we cross that, the government will be able to do with you what it wants to do with you.
Well, we now have to come back to the last 3 years, because from the start we were talking about this dangerous. Now, after 3 years, we know that pandemic should never happen, that infection fatality rate is lower than seasonal flu. We also knew some other things, but it seems to that there was a reason why should pandemic look like this way. These lockdowns, also digital ID, exactly COVID passport, and the mandatory vaccination. And now we have to go back because it seems to some people knew before it even happened that will happen. Can you tell us something about this? What happened in 2019 concerning this and people who were involved in Federal Reserves and their actions before the pandemic?
Well, actually, we have to start even further back, because this is not an agenda that started in 2019. This is an agenda that started a long time ago, but at the very least, we could go back to 2001. And as people might remember, 2001 is when the September 11th attacks happened in the United States, which of course started the whole war on terror and all of the craziness of wars in the Middle East and destabilization of that region and the terror attacks and the threat of terrorism and Al-Qaeda becoming the number one problem in the universe that everyone had to devote all their time and attention to. Again, I think people know that part of the story. But the other thing that happened around that same time in the United States was another attack that was taking place that most people probably forget about. It was the anthrax attacks. And for people who don't remember, there was anthrax spores that were being put in letters and mailed to various people around the United States. There were several such letters that were received. A few people died. Several people were targeted, including a couple of senators who happened to be senators that were holding up the passage of the U.S. Patriot Act, which was the Homeland Security Authorization Bill that basically obliterated what was left of the U.S. Constitution in the name of fighting terrorism. And lo and behold, when the anthrax attacks occurred and Congress was shut down and craziness was happening, and then the Patriot Act got tabled and passed immediately before anyone even had a chance to read what was in it. Absolute insanity. But yes, the anthrax attacks were blamed, of course, initially on Iraq. Oh, it's got this bentonite that's a key signature of Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction and his anthrax program and blah, blah, blah. Actually, that turned out to be complete hokum. And even the FBI and everyone else involved with the investigation had to say, oh, wait, actually, it had nothing to do with Iraq. No, that was a red herring. Actually, it came from the U.S.'s own biological weapons program at Fort Detrick. But anyway, moving right along. And people don't remember the rest of that story and how that played out and Bruce Ivins and all of that. But the point was that the Homeland Security state, the terror threat that we were all facing after September 11th, was intimately related to the bio-terror threat. That they were starting the creation of this biosecurity complex at the same time. So on the back of those anthrax attacks, they started to introduce all of this infrastructure, institutional infrastructure, legislative infrastructure for creating a biosecurity state that would be similar to the Homeland Security state and, oh, protect us from the terrorists. This was going to be, oh, protect us from the bioterrorists. And so there was creation of entire agencies within the U.S. government. There was the creation of all these model state emergency legislation that would give governors, for example, in the United States, it would give them the power to quarantine people and mass vaccinate people. And it was billions and billions and billions of dollars that went into various development of vaccines and development of other types of prophylaxis and other treatments that could be envisioned. So it was basically the kickstarting of the machinery for what became what we saw in 2020. So that's really, I mean, of course there's no scientific basis whatsoever. 6 feet, 2 meters of social distance was totally made up. It had nothing to do with, they didn't even pretend that it had anything to do with science, that this had been scientifically determined. It was just something that they made up. We saw the results of that. So what I'm trying to say is that for decades, we have seen the creation of a biosecurity complex to go along with the Homeland Security complex that was waiting there, waiting in the wings for some sort of event. And it doesn't matter if that event is real or fake, or whether it's actually killing millions of people, or whether it'll make a few people have the sniffles, or whatever it is, it doesn't matter. It has nothing to do with that. What it was always about was being able to essentially flip that switch and go from practice to real life with regards to all of these tools of the biosecurity complex and really ramping up the biosecurity state. And part of that, of course, was the introduction of the health passes and the digital IDs that we've been talking about. There is definitely something that's happened there. It's happened at the economic level, as you were saying, but one thing that I will always point to was October of 2019 was not only when Event 201 was going down, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and Johns Hopkins and all of these other institutions put together a simulation
also.
of a globally spreading coronavirus event. Yeah. But also, at the same time, the Milken Institute in the United States was hosting a conference in which Anthony Fauci and others were speaking about the need for some sort of event to come along to hurry up the production of all these great new ideas that we have for mRNA vaccines and DNA vaccines, these new types of technologies that will really transform the way we think of vaccines and public health. But it'll take at least a decade and billions of dollars for pharma manufacturers to get these new vaccines through all the approval process and clinical trials. But if there was some sort of big emergency event, then the government could step in and do it for them, essentially. And they were openly talking about that in October of 2019. So I think we know, at the very least, who are some of the big winners of the past few years.
At the end of this interview, what really is too short, but we have to take care of your time, precious time. Can you send a message to people in Croatia and people who understand our language here in neighborhood, what we can do to fight against this dangerous, to losing completely freedom, to have absolute control for our lives?
I would say that if you are aware of this agenda, if you understand the dangers that we are talking about, then you are already ahead in this game. You are ahead of almost everybody else in this population, because I think most people may have some sense that, hey, this seems a bit strange, but they will go along with it. And I think to me, that's the real nightmare scenario, because a tyranny that is a boot in your face, that is forcing you at point of a gun to do this, you have to use this digital ID, whatever the case may be, that at the very least is outright in your face tyranny that people will stand up to. They will resist. But if people go along with it, oh, it's convenient. Oh, what's the big deal? It's just an app on my smartphone. I can buy things with this CBDC. It's okay. If people go along with it, that is so much worse. Because then when you stand up and you don't understand, this is a system of control, we shouldn't be accepting this, you will look like the crazy one, right? So if you understand the danger that we are facing, great, awesome, you're already ahead. What we need to do is to share this understanding with others and to make them understand that, no, this is not about convenience. This is not about being able to buy something at the local store in a quicker fashion. This is about controlling you, controlling your actions, controlling your life, controlling your ability to say no to a government in the future. And even if you imagine that this particular government that exists at this particular time is totally good and they have your best interests at heart and they're good people, well, we can imagine at some point in the future, someone who doesn't have your best interests at heart, someone who isn't good, might get into a position of political power. And then what do? How do you resist in a world of digital IDs and central bank digital currency and total centralized control? that right there should be enough to send shivers down your spine. So as I say, if you're aware of this, awesome. That's the first step. And the next step is to make others aware of it and to prepare yourself for a future where this isn't happening. For the time being, cash still exists. The ability to barter and trade with other people still exists. The ability to leave your phone at home and to go out and to do things in the real world without your phone still exists. And if we do not flex that muscle and make use of it, it will go away. It will start to deteriorate. So we need to start thinking about and planning and doing those sorts of things that can expand the domain of freedom in our everyday lives. And if people are interested in that, I have a weekly series called Solutions Watch, where every week I'm looking at things that people can do to improve their own lives and to help change the world for the better. And sometimes they're really small, really tiny, detailed sort of solutions. Sometimes they're really big picture ideas. But I think all of those things are useful. And I just want to applaud anyone in your audience who does see the danger and understands what's happening. Because as I say, that already makes you one of the very fortunate few who understand what the importance of the time that we're living in, and thus able to grasp how incredible an opportunity this is that we have to be living in this time.
Well, everybody who wants to know more about this, subscribe for James Corbett report. Thank you, James. It was really a pleasure, and I hope I see you soon for another topic, because it seems to you that you are endless information database, and that will help lots of people in Croatia who are listening to us to be more aware and helping us to make decisions for the future. Thank you, and have a nice day in Japan.
I appreciate you having me on, and I'm looking forward to talking to you again.